Good afternoon and welcome to Book Sandwich Day. My name is Rebecca.Fuss. I'm with the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library and appreciate your coming and also appreciate our committee who has selected our books and speakers for this series. So thank you to them. We will continue our Book Sandwiched In 60th anniversary remembrances with a pop-up review today looking back at another Supreme Court justice. The review was on December 4th, 1956. The book was Brandeis, Free Man's Life by Alpheus Mason. And this is a biography of Louis Brandeis, Supreme Court Justice from 1916 to 1939. He was dubbed the People's Lawyer and became one of the most famous and influential figures ever to serve on the High Court. His opinions were, according to legal scholars, some of the greatest defenses of freedom of speech and the right to privacy ever written by a member of the Supreme Court. The author, Alpheus Mason, was a Princeton law professor and one of the country's most judicial biographers. A Free Man's Life was one of 4 books he had written on Justice Brandeis. The book sold over 50,000 copies and remained on the bestseller list for 5 months in 1947, 9 years before the review here at Central Library. The reviewer was Saul Linowitz. Remember that name? He was a diplomat, lawyer, author, and businessman. He helped negotiate the return of the Panama Canal to Panama under the direction of President Jimmy Carter and received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But around here, he's most remembered for being the chair of a small local company that later became Xerox Corporation. And what a great story this is. After serving a naval commission at World War II, Linowitz went to Rochester to practice law, and here he met a young businessman named Joseph Wilson, who had just succeeded his father as president of Haloid Corporation, a $17 million a year photographic supplies producer that was overshadowed by the Rochester giant Eastman Kodak. Wilson wanted to expand his photocopying business, and his research director had encountered an obscure process called electrophotography, invented by an equally obscure engineer and patent lawyer named Chester Carlson. It was being developed by a research organization in Columbus, Ohio. Wilson didn't want Eastman Kodak to get word of this, so he didn't tell his company's attorney. He asked Saul Linowitz to help him out on this one-time project, to draw up an option form for the process and then accompany him to Columbus. And here's what Linowitz had to say about the trip. With some fanfare, our hosts brought out a metal roller coated with some dark substance, a rag of cat's fur, a transparent plastic child's ruler with dark lines scratched in it, and a bright light. They rubbed the roller with the cat's fur. Then they shined the light through the ruler onto the roller, and some feeble off-white lines appeared on the dark surface. It was the most unimpressive demonstration I've ever witnessed. Anyway, they acquired the patents, and in 1959, the company produced the first copy machine made available for the commercial market. Linowitz served as general counsel and then chairman of the board, and by 1966, the company had become one of the 12 largest in the United States in terms of stock value. All this, and somehow he found the time to review a book for Friends of the Rochester Public Library. We remain grateful for his support then and for your support today. And now here to review Sisters-in-Law is a female leader in law here in Rochester. Elizabeth Wolford is a United States District Judge of the United States District Court for the Western District of New York. She's the first female district judge to serve in the Western District. Liz was born in Buffalo, but has spent most of her life in Rochester, graduating from Fairport High School. She earned her bachelor's degree from Colgate University and her law degree from the University of Notre Dame. She served as 2004 and as president of the Foundation of the Monroe County Bar from 2010 to 2012. Prior to becoming a judge, Liz practiced law with the Wolford law firm, founded by her father, Michael Wolford, for over 20 years. In 2013, President Obama nominated Elizabeth Wolford to serve as United States District Judge, Western District, and we are delighted to have her today. So please join me in welcoming the Honorable Elizabeth Wolford.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for Sandy Shapiro, who is the one who reached out to me to ask me to do this. Thank you for asking me to do this, Sandy, because I have to admit, if I was not asked to speak here today, I doubt I probably would have read this book, and it's not because I don't greatly admire Justices O'Connor and Ginsburg, but I guess you could say that I'm busy trying to change my own little world here in Rochester and keep up with my busy docket. So Linda Hirshman, the author of this book, has said that she hoped when she started this project that she would find out that Justices O'Connor and Ginsburg sneaked out to lunch and went shoe shopping together like best girlfriends. But that was not their relationship. The author refers to their relationship as an affectionate alliance, the kind of self-contained and disciplined behavior that they displayed throughout their careers. It's the story of who the author refers to as the two most important women in America to date. The book opens on June 26, 1996, with Justice Ginsburg announcing the opinion for the court, declaring that the Virginia Military Institute, an all-male institution since before the Civil War, must admit qualified women. Taking her eyes off the text she is reading, Justice Ginsburg looks down the bench at Justice O'Connor, quoting from a narrower opinion that Justice O'Connor authored 14 years earlier on the subject of sex-segregated public universities. And as the book tells it, the VMI case, written less than 3 years into Justice Ginsburg's tenure, would not have been hers to write but for Justice O'Connor. As is custom, the senior justice in the majority had assigned Justice O'Connor to write that opinion, but she demurred, saying, "This should be Ruth." The book highlights how these two women made their way through and eventually shaped their worlds. In many respects, Justices O'Connor and Ginsburg could not have been more different. They grew up in different corners of the country. Justice O'Connor on a southwestern cattle ranch, Justice Ginsburg in Brooklyn. One was a Republican, one a Democrat. Yet, as the book highlights, their differences aside, their stories parallel each other in many respects. They both obtained superb educations, both going to a law school at a time when women rarely went to college, let alone graduate school. They both married young with, by all accounts, incredibly supportive spouses. They were both young mothers, but set out to make their way in what was still very much a man's world, and not without struggles, as highlighted by the obstacles they both faced when, despite graduating at the top of their law school classes, they struggled to find employment. When Justice O'Connor applied to attorney positions during her last semester of law school in 1952, recruiters urged her to consider secretarial roles. And she eventually was only able to find employment in the legal profession because she volunteered to work at the county attorney's office. When Justice Ginsburg, graduating at the top of her class, was offered by her prominent law professors to Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter as a law clerk, he rejected the suggestion because, and I'm quoting, "I'm not hiring a woman." In my view, the author does a very nice job of weaving the stories of the two together and their combined impact on gender equality from a legal perspective. The early part of the book is devoted to Justice Ginsburg's work as part of the Women's Rights Project at the ACLU during the early part of her legal career, where she personally wrote the briefs and argued the cases that really revolutionized the law for women. As a reader, you understand the strategic decisions made by Justice Ginsburg, then Attorney Ginsburg, in terms of picking her cases to slowly chip away at the constitutional barriers to gender equality. In 1993, President Clinton said when he nominated Justice Ginsburg that she was the Thurgood Marshall of the women's rights movement. That analogy was appropriate given that the last successful Supreme Court nomination prior to Justice Ginsburg by a Democratic president was Thurgood Marshall, who was nominated by Lyndon Johnson in 1967. I was struck personally by not only Justice Ginsburg's work to define the constitutional standard that is applied to evaluate gender stereotypes, but also her work with respect to juries. Women, as most of you I'm sure know, were granted the right to vote in 1920, but it was not until many years later that gender equality was actually extended to jury service. The Civil Rights Act of 1957 gave women the right to serve on federal juries, but it was actually not until 1975 that women could serve on juries in all 50 states. I will admit that I was not aware that it was actually during my lifetime that women were finally treated equally with respect to jury service in all 50 states. In my role today as a district judge, I regularly interact with juries and I try to work to make sure that all litigants have a jury of their peers representing the diverse community in which we all live and work. Our jury system, as far as I'm concerned, is really the bedrock of our democracy, and to think that it was not until 1975 where women could actually serve in all 50 states on juries, to me, was really just astounding. Now, Justice Ginsburg's work as an advocate really ended in 1980 when she became a judge on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. It was the following year that Justice O'Connor became the first female Supreme Court justice. And according to the book, the Supreme Court at that time seemed to be on the verge of rolling back some of those equality rules. But at least the way the book tells the story, Justice O'Connor stopped that. Linda Hirshman refers to it as Justice O'Connor, and I'm quoting, picking up the baton from Justice Ginsburg as if they were in a relay race and casting the crucial fifth vote. The author describes their different approaches as follows. Sandra Day O'Connor played defense. She would not permit the courts to roll the equality ball backwards, while Ruth Bader Ginsburg played offense. Justice O'Connor always said that she was happy to be the first, but she did not want to be the last. The fact is that Justice O'Connor became the ultimate symbol of women's progress, and once at the Supreme Court, Justice O'Connor had an impact by being such an effective and respected female justice. I have to say that I personally identify with Justice O'Connor's sentiments. Being the first female district judge here in the Western District of New York, I'm fully aware of the need for me to strive to be an effective and respected judge, and I wholly embrace the notion that while I am happy to be the first, I certainly do not want to be the last. We have to keep in mind, which I think the book really does a good job of demonstrating, that while there was no question that Justice O'Connor was extremely bright, her background would not have necessarily led somebody to conclude that she would become a Supreme Court justice. And not just any Supreme Court justice, but really the Supreme Court justice who had that crucial fifth vote for so many years. She was not a constitutional law scholar, nor a federal appellate judge like Justice Ginsburg. Instead, her judicial career had spanned a mere 6 years, the bulk of which was spent serving as a trial judge on the Maricopa County Superior Court from 1975 until 1979, which is the Arizona State Court of General Jurisdiction. It's like the New York State Supreme Court. It's the trial court at the state court level. In other words, she served most of her judicial tenure prior to being elevated to the Supreme Court on a state trial court, not on a federal court or even on the highest state court in Arizona. Yet, Justice O'Connor was eminently respected. She was confirmed by the United States unanimously It's unheard of in these days. I cannot help but wonder what the reaction would be today to a nomination such as this to the Supreme Court. Indeed, I believe some would question whether either Justice O'Connor or Justice Ginsburg could be confirmed in today's political climate. In fact, Justice Ginsburg, who was confirmed on August 3rd, 1993 by a vote of 96-3, so almost unanimous, has said during interviews that she will not retire because it would not be possible to obtain confirmation today of a jurist such as herself. Now, I will say I did feel in reading the book that it was readily apparent that the author admires Justice Ginsburg more than Justice O'Connor. And this has received some criticism in book reviews that I've read. For example, a review in the Wall Street Journal concluded, "Sisters in Law is carefully researched and enjoyably written, but a dual biography it is not. By the closing chapters, Ms. Hirshman has abandoned her initial thesis, reducing," this is the Wall Street Journal's words, "Justice O'Connor to second banana in this tale and embracing Ginsburg mania." Now, I'm not sure that's a fair assessment. No question, the author definitely seems to idolize Justice Ginsburg. In fact, I've read an interview given by the author where she refers to Justice Ginsburg as superhuman, like Dr. Spock on Star Trek. By contrast, Justice O'Connor is portrayed as much more human. But the author has said, while Justice Ginsburg has done more to change the world, she has never been as powerful as Sandra Day O'Connor. Until 2005, Justice O'Connor was that crucial swing vote on the Supreme Court. It was, as the author calls it, Queen Sandra's court. And the author did say in an interview that she was surprised as to how much she came to respect and esteem Sandra Day O'Connor as the process of writing the book went by, in part because of the law clerks who had worked for Justice O'Connor and what they had to say about her. According to the author, many of those female clerks that she talked to were liberal, and she found that very informative and realized that that Justice O'Connor was on the Supreme Court when critical women's rights issues came before her, and Ginsburg was nowhere around. So she played a more important role than she realized, is what the author has said. In part, I do think the author's differing views of these two women can be attributed certainly to the author's own political philosophy, particularly when it comes to women's rights issues, but also it may be attributable to the response of the two women to the book. With over 300 footnotes and almost 20 pages of bibliography and sources in fine print, it's evident that the author spent an inordinate amount of time researching her subjects. I read that she reviewed over 200 plus letters that Justice Ginsburg wrote to her quote-unquote favorite client, Stephen Weissenfeld. She has hours, the author does, of taped interviews with John Driggs. He was the former Phoenix mayor who invited the O'Connors to the houseboat trip with then Chief Justice Warren Burger. The author interviewed almost all of the judge's former law clerks, and she was apparently the first person to read through Barry Goldwater's files when they were released. But her book is not based on an interview of her two subjects. When asked why not, the author explained that she first met with Justice Ginsburg in Washington, D.C., and Justice Ginsburg said she would cooperate if Sandra Day O'Connor said it was okay. Then, Linda Hirshman, who lives in Arizona and who, according to her, knows a lot of people who know Justice O'Connor, one day, as Linda Hirshman tells the story, she's sitting at her home office, cracker crumbs all over her. She's writing her next book, or this book, and her cell phone rings. She picks it up, and the caller says, "Linda, it's Sandra O'Connor." Justice O'Connor was calling Linda Hirshman to tell her why she would not cooperate. Now, the author Ms. Hirshman would not reveal what was said during the call, but she attributes part of the reason that Justice O'Connor would not cooperate to her being very domineering and wanting to have control over the story. Although by virtue of not cooperating, as Linda Hirshman puts it, she had no control. And as Ms. Hirshman says, if there are mistakes, it's their fault. Linda Hirshman tells this story that after the book was written, she went to see Justice O'Connor give a talk in New York City, and she observed many of her sources, these former law clerks, in the audience. Some of them came up to Ms. Hirshman after the presentation, and one of them said to her, "You don't think we would have talked to you without checking first, do you?" She also shares that Justice Ginsburg sent all of her speeches to Linda Hirshman that she had given about Sandra Day O'Connor after she retired. So it seems as though, from my perspective at least, even though Justice Ginsburg was not interviewed for this book and she did not overtly cooperate, she did provide, I think it's fair to say, more assistance than Justice O'Connor, and I cannot help but think that that may have colored the author's views of these two women. I thought the author did a wonderful job of explaining some very complex areas of the law and complicated Supreme Court cases in understandable terms without dumbing them down, so to speak. In fact, now having read the book, there's some cases that I anticipate will be decided this year by the Supreme Court, and I think you might have a better perspective on the impact of those cases and how, if at all, they may have been different if Justice O'Connor was still on the court. There's three in particular. One is the Fisher versus University of Texas at Austin case. That's the affirmative action case involving the University of Texas at Austin. The first phase of that case at the Supreme Court is discussed in the book, and it's anticipated that there will be a decision in that this term. The case was argued in December of last year. Probably one of the cases that's gotten more publicity than any is the Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt case. This is the case involving the Texas law with respect to abortion clinics. The argument was on March 2nd of last month. Some have referred to it as the most far-reaching abortion rights case the Supreme Court has considered in a generation. Texas enacted this law in 2013. You all may remember Wendy Davis came to prominence during the efforts by the Texas legislature to enact the law when she led a filibuster, ultimately unsuccessfully. The opponents of the law claim that it will shut down 75% of the state's abortion clinics. And the issue the court is considering is this an undue burden under the Casey standard that Justice O'Connor was so instrumental in formulating? And then, of course, it's a number of consolidated cases, but the name that you probably are most familiar with is the Little Sisters of the Poor versus Burwell. That was argued March 23, 2016. It deals with issues involving contraception coverage under ACA or Obamacare. The last subtitle in this book is A Wise Latina Woman, and Ms. Hirshman ends the book with the story about Justice Sonia Sotomayor's confirmation hearing and her having to walk back the statement that she had made during a speech in 2001 that, quote, a wise Latina woman with the richness of her experiences would more often than not reach a better conclusion than a white male who hasn't lived that life. When asked why, this is Linda Hirshman, was asked why she decided to end the book in that fashion, she explained, Ruth and Sandra did it. They behaved differently. They brought their different insights into the decision-making process, but they never acknowledged it openly. But Sotomayor acknowledged it openly. And so I thought that would be a perfect way to finish, look into the future, and give an answer to the debate O'Connor and Ginsburg have been having about whether they made a difference. It's really a call for more female judges. And I went through the same confirmation process as both Justices O'Connor and Ginsburg, although obviously not quite at that level of intensity, although I can assure you that when I was going through it, it felt like it was that level of intensity. Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and District Court judgeships are created pursuant to Article 3 of the Constitution. To become an Article 3 judge, you need to be nominated by the President and confirmed by the United States Senate, and once confirmed, it's a lifetime appointment. According to the National Women's Law Center, as of last month, President Obama has appointed 136 female federal judges. That's more than any other president to date. 33% of the current active district court judgeships are currently held by women, although there are still 6 district courts around the country where no woman has ever served in that position. In addition, there are currently 78 vacancies in the federal courts, including one in the Western District of New York, where a woman in Buffalo has been nominated to serve as a district judge. So in the words of Justice O'Connor, while I'm happy to be the first, I certainly do not want to be the last. So that completes my book review, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions or try to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you. Paul.
Sandra O'Connor, I think, got the nomination as portrayed in this book because of social and political connections, not because of her qualifications as a judge, per se. Do you think that could happen today?
So just so everybody is familiar, the question is Sandra Day O'Connor, at least as portrayed in the book, got her nomination because of social and political connections, not necessarily because of her qualifications. And could that happen today? You know, I think the answer to that is probably at the time that President Reagan was looking to nominate the first female justices of the Supreme Court, the fact of the matter is there weren't a lot to choose from. And so I think Sandra Day O'Connor rose to the top of the list, so to speak, because of, in part, the political and social connections that she had. Could it happen today? I think it's naive to think that anybody ends up in one of these positions just solely based on qualifications, because there's so many qualified jurists out there. There's so many people who have the qualifications to serve on the Supreme Court, and I think that ultimately what sets them apart, in part, are social and political connections at the end of the day. But you know, I would be. It's not the same world that we live in now that we did back in 1980 or 1981, and so no, I think it would be very unusual to have somebody who had only served for 6 years as a judge, and mostly just on the state court trial court bench with no real constitutional law background at all. I think that it would be very unusual, and it would be very tough to get somebody like that through the confirmation process for Supreme Court, at least. Yes, there's a hand. Sandy.
What do you think of the current situation about filling the Scalia vacancy?
I don't know that I really can. The question is, what do I think about the current situation and trying to fill the Scalia vacancies? I am reluctant to say anything, quite frankly, publicly about that. The nominee certainly seems very qualified. Yes.
When you went through your nomination process, you went through the staff of the judiciary?
So the question is, when I went through the confirmation process, did I have to meet with the staff of the Judiciary Committee? No, I had dealings with Senator Schumer's staff, because Senator Schumer was the senator who had recommended me, and he obviously serves and plays a powerful role on the Judiciary Committee. But the primary folks who I dealt with as part of the process were individuals who work as in the nominations section of the Department of Justice. And so they're responsible for vetting you, they're responsible for interviewing you, they're responsible for preparing you for the hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee. I mean, they were my primary folks who you end up dealing with. Very, very hardworking, intelligent people. I was really impressed. I will say, as part of the process, I was just so impressed by the attorneys you end up dealing with in this process, who come from top law schools from all over the country, could easily be working at high-powered firms in New York City and DC, and instead they're dealing with a bunch of nervous judicial nominees going through this process, and they work 24/7, and really was very impressed by how not only the caliber, but the dedication that those folks had to the process. Yeah. I don't. You know, the FBI probably looked at my Fairport yearbook. Yes.
Why are there so many vacancies now? Is it because the Senate does not want to confirm?
Well, the question is, why are there so many vacancies now? Is it because the Senate does not want to confirm? The answer to that, I don't know for sure, but some would attribute it to the so-called nuclear option. I was the first district judge that was confirmed after the Senate went nuclear. And what happened was there were 3 nominees to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and there was a lot of controversy, not necessarily over those particular nominees, but whether or not the 3 vacancies should be filled. And at the time, there were filibusters that were preventing a vote coming up on the nominees. And the Democrats, who at the time were in the majority of the Senate, decided to invoke what's called the nuclear option. And so they decreased the threshold from 60 votes that you need to bring a nominee to the floor. They decreased that from 60 to 50 for all but the Supreme Court. So that threshold of 60 is still in place for the Supreme Court, but it's not in place for any other federal judge. And so there's some, I think, who would say that created a lot of hard feelings, perhaps on top of hard feelings that had already been established on behalf of both sides over the years because of various things that went back and forth. And I think that has created a logjam, so to speak. Yes, Barb.
You remember going the intense scrutiny from the Senate Judiciary Committee. Did you feel that there was a difference in Wolford between the kinds of questions you were asked by the Democrat members of the committee as opposed to the Republican members of the committee? Did you want to discuss a little bit about the screening?
The question is, when I went through the process, did I feel that there was a difference between the questions being asked by Democratic members of the committee versus Republican members of the committee? The truth is, there were only 2 of the senators at my hearing. My hearing, the day of my hearing, the first nominee for the D.C. Circuit, Patty Millett, who was a name actually who was mentioned as a potential Supreme Court nomination, and her name was being mentioned quite a bit as somebody who may be nominated for the position that's there right now. Her hearing was the same day as mine. So she got to go first, lucky her. And the Senate Judiciary Committee, I think every single member of the Senate Judiciary was there for her hearing. And the media was there. It was packed, absolutely packed. And so after they finished with that portion of the hearing, they took a quick break, and I think everybody left the room other than my family, and Senator Schumer stayed and Senator Grassley stayed. And the questions were, I thought, very fair, and there wasn't really any political tint to any of the questions that I was asked. But again, I'm not going through it at quite the level that you go through it when at the Circuit Court or the Supreme Court, obviously. Yeah, or if they're all there, exactly. Yes?
Judge, was there something in the way the relationship between Justice O'Connor and Justice Ginsburg was portrayed that either really impressed you or surprised you?
So the question is, was there something in the way the relationship between Justice O'Connor and Justice Ginsburg was portrayed that either surprised me or impressed me? I was surprised the way the book tells the story that Justice Ginsburg seems as though she was very deferential to Justice O'Connor in terms, not necessarily in terms of decisions or anything of that nature, but in the inner workings of the Supreme Court. I also was surprised at, and I suppose I should not have been, but surprised at the social interactions among the Supreme Court and how they use their chits, so to speak, and whether or not they're going to become involved in a concurring opinion or the minority opinion or the majority opinion to really shape the majority opinion. I did not appreciate the really, I guess, level of politicking, so to speak, that was involved at that level.
Yes.
I think we'll agree, in 1981, it was obviously a much different society. And the fact is, being a conservative Republican, with Reagan, I think he pretty well knew that the Republicans were going to support Justice O'Connor, and certainly the Democrats wanted a woman in the Supreme Court, so I think that's why they had that unanimous support. My question is this. I don't know if it was alluded to in the book, but isn't it true that Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia had a very good personal relationship outside of the court? And did you find that somewhat strange?
The question is, isn't it true that Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia have a very good personal relationship, or did have a good personal relationship outside the court? And did I find that strange? The answer to that is yes. From my understanding, they are very close. And in fact, I have heard a number of stories from folks who do know them who confirm that no, the two of them are extremely close, notwithstanding clearly their very different perspectives on the law. That issue is not really discussed, though, at all in the book. It's not touched upon. And I saw an interview that the author gave. She was asked why didn't she touch upon that, and she said she didn't really find it that interesting. And that from her perspective, the more interesting topic that she wanted to write on, which really I don't think has been addressed too much today, is the relationship between Justice Ginsburg and Justice O'Connor.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
I have a little different perspective on Justice O'Connor. I can remember when she retired, because she had this swing vote, I was terribly disappointed that she went back to Phoenix. But subsequent to that, I had a very personal relationship with the justice, because she eventually moved a house that she and her husband had built, stone by stone, next to the Phoenix Historical Museum. And I have a daughter in Phoenix who became the first CEO of this house with Justice O'Connor. To further that, Justice O'Connor married this daughter 2 years ago, and so I had a personal relationship with her, and at the reception sat right next to her. And
So,
during the
really?
time-
So Justice O'Connor married your daughter?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
At the reception, but one of the things that she wrote, a quote that I have of her, and that she had is, "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of the meaning of the universe, and of the mystery of human life," which had to do, of course, as far as her dealing with abortion and that kind of thing. But I found it very preferable. And of course, I have pictures of she and I in my apartment.
Interesting.
Fantastic woman, and very.
Well, and I will say this, I think a lot is made, particularly at the Supreme Court level, but really at all levels and to some degree, of these judicial nominees who go through the process. And are they Democrat, are they Republican? In my sense, both based on personal experience as well as based on everything I've heard from judges who I've met since I became a judge, is once you get into this position, you never think of yourself as one political affiliation or the other. And I do really believe that, for the most part, the Supreme Court justices don't necessarily approach a case, well, how would a Republican decide this, or how would a Democrat decide this? I think they go by their interpretation of the Constitution and the law. Any other questions? Yes?
It's just interesting, her post-retirement life, she's become the spokesperson for civic education.
Right.
Now in our public schools, and she's become very active again.
Right. And the other, I don't know if she's still doing it, but Justice O'Connor, after she, and some of the other Supreme Court justices have done this as well, after they retire or leave the Supreme Court, they sit by designation on the Court of Appeals in the district from which they come. I can only imagine as an attorney, if you go to argue a case and there you have a former Supreme Court justice there, that would be intimidating, to say the least.
Well, she's spending a lot of time with school children now, which is exciting.
Yes, yeah. Yes.
What's your opinion with respect to cameras?
The question is, what's my opinion with respect to having cameras in the courtroom? I think it's important for the public to know what's going on in the courtroom. And I think transparency is critical. And the fact of the matter is, if you just have audio, you don't have any cameras, I think you lose something. Now, the argument against having cameras in a trial courtroom is that it could influence the witnesses. And the last thing you want to do, obviously, is influence, particularly in a criminal case, influence the witness's testimony. In state court, they allow at least still photographs to be taken in the trial courtrooms. I think that you need to do it cautiously for trial courts, but I support the concept of more exposure through cameras at both the trial court level and particularly at the Supreme Court level. I think that would be a tremendous opportunity. I mean, most people never will have an opportunity to see a Supreme Court argument. And to think that even just going back to what Justice O'Connor is doing with civic education of school children, to allow them to be able to get a glimpse as to how this branch of the government works, I think would be helpful. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay.